this is something which is very different from the situation in Europe.
At first, a little bit strange, but then it's really worth, and I think it's very, very good thing.
I think they're very nice.
I like to see the respect for older people.
This is very important to respect older people and family.
Big shock for me because in Poland we also respect elder people, but not as in Korea.
Overall, though, I think it's a pretty good culture because there's such a concern about the people around you, right? And the culture where
The concept of filial piety is a well-known aspect of Korean culture, which began to generate great interest during the 2002 FIFA World Cup Korea-Japan and the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Learning the spirit of filial piety takes a lifetime. Life in this world. A baby's cry signals the start of life. But life as a Korean begins even before a baby is born. Parents pray earnestly to the rock of fertility in hopes of conceiving a child. They also drink a mixture of stone ground from a fertility statue. These are some of the heartfelt efforts made by parents even before a child is born.
가족 질서를 중시하는 유교 이념이 정착되면서 대를 잇는다든가 또 자식이 관료로 진출해서 양반 가문을 유지한다든가 또 제사를 받든다든가 이런 문제가 사회적으로 큰 쟁점이 되면서 그런 속에서 이제 결혼을 앞둔 여성이라든가 또 결혼한 여성이 이제 곧 이제 그 아들 낳는 비방을 이제 습득을 하고 또 그것에 훈련을 받게 되는데 특별히 여성이 이런 비방 중에서도 좀 힘들었던 거는 달을 마시는 풍속인데 이 달은 음력을 상징하기 때문에 이 음기를 이제 보강한다는 그런 측면에서 달이 뜰 때 숨을 힘껏 들이마시면서 달을 먹고 다시 그것을 뱉고 이럴 때 여성들이 너무 힘들어서 그야말로 달을 마시다가 주저앉고 울었다 하는 그런 여러 가지 역사적 기록도 있습니다.
Traditionally, after a baby is born, a family would hang gumjul, or taboo ropes, across the gate of the house. It was a sign telling people not to enter, thus limiting the spread of germs and contagious diseases. Gumjul were made by rolling strands of straw counterclockwise.
유전자는 그 부정도 막기 위험이고 또 귀신이 유전자를 싫어해. 그래서 유전자를 꽈가지고 이렇게 달아놓은 거예요. 이렇게.
The gumjul could also indicate whether the baby was a boy or a girl. If it was adorned with a red pepper or a piece of charcoal, it was a boy. Pine needles or paper hung on the gumjul meant a girl had been born. These decorations also conveyed wishes. Charcoal, for example, represented a writing utensil and the wish that the baby boy would become a scholar. Pine needles stood for sewing needles and signified a wish for the girl to become skilled at sewing. A special ceremony was held on the 7th day after delivery, called Hanire. A different ceremony was held every week for the next 3 weeks. They involved changing the baby into new clothes, allowing relatives to bless the baby, and letting the mother go outside. The Baegil marks the 100th day after the baby's birth, when the family gathers to celebrate the child's survival through this first critical period of life, and to wish him or her good health, good fortune, and a long life. The existence of this celebration reflects a time when infant mortality was much higher than it is now. I reflect on how the year has passed. It's a wonderful feeling to have given birth to a baby, but there is also a sense of fear. However, Jisung has brought us so much happiness. It's a kind of happiness that is almost magical and beyond description. Jisung is our little angel, and he is now celebrating his first birthday. The baby's first birthday is celebrated with what is called a dolchangji. This means a baby's first birthday party, but it's also a party to celebrate the baby's survival thus far and the fact that he or she has become an official member of society. A traditional doljabi is held during a dolchangji. This is when a grain of rice, a book, money, a piece of thread, and other items are set before a baby. Whatever item he or she chooses is meant to be a sign of the baby's future.
돈 잡으면 좋겠습니다.
예, 아버님은 솔직하게 돈 잡길 원하고 계시고요. 어머님은요?
영필.
예, 어머님은 네, 또 아버님과 특별한 큰 박수 부탁드릴게요.
For example, noodles and thread symbolize longevity, while books and writing instruments signify scholarship. Money foretells wealth. These days, an item such as a computer mouse or a golf ball may be set before the child to encourage a more specific career path.
본인 행사의 진행을
했습니다. 그래서 전국적으로
A coming-of-age ceremony marks a child's entrance into adolescence and thus adulthood. A modern version of the ceremony is based on the old ritual known as Gyobaerye. During a Gyobaerye, a young man changes clothes 3 times. He starts with casual clothes and then puts on holiday attire. Finally, he dons formal garb. There are 10 procedures in a Gyobaerye, including the hat rite. Though complex, this ceremony, called the Samgare, is a very important part of the Gyobaerye, signifying the youth's transition into adulthood. After the Samgare, wine is poured on the earth 3 times, and a vow is made to the gods of the heaven and earth. A new name is then given to the young man. This process symbolizes his status as an adult, with new relationships and a new place in the social order. While young men participated in the 3-day Gyobaerye, young women went through a 1-day Gyobaerye, in which they received a hairpin and a simple congratulatory speech. In general, women observed this ritual on their wedding day. This shorter and less elaborate ceremony reflected women's status at the time.
현대적인 성인식은 되게 간편한데 그거에 비해서 뭐 제가 느끼기에는 조금 길다 복잡하다 느끼는 것 같고요. 또 반대로 생각해 보면은 뭐 어떻게 보면 격식이라고 할 수도 있지만 그만큼 예의랑 예절을 차리면서 하는 게 거기에 대한 의미가 더 부여되는 것 같아서 그것이 장점인 것 같습니다.
어렵게 결례를 치르고 나니까요. 뭔가 이제 성인이라는 자각이 들고요. 물론 20살 생일을 맞았을 때 이미 성인이 된 거지만 그때는 그냥 20번째 생일에 지나지 않았지만 이렇게 치르고 나니까 뭔가 책임감이나 의무감 같은 것도 느껴지고요. 앞으로 제가 어떻게 나아가야 할지에 대한 생각을 좀 하게 됐습니다.
But those who did not have the financial means, including most commoners, were not able to hold a Gyobaerye or Gyobaerye. Men from these families celebrated the start of adulthood on Baegil Day, which falls on the 15th day of the 7th month of the lunar calendar. Held during the season when rice paddies are weeded, the festival commemorated the villagers' hard work and included food and wine. On this day, young men would change into new clothes and participate in a stone lifting event. The stone weighed 60 kilograms. If a young man could lift it onto his back, he was considered an adult. Another Korean custom is to seek the advice of a fortune teller who bases the reading on the year, date, and hour of birth for both the bride and the groom. These days, engaged couples seek out fortune tellers for fun, but the parents of an engaged couple will almost always consult a fortune teller to determine their gongha, or how well a pair matches in many ways, and to foretell their saju, or their fate.
태양과 다른 음양의 성질이잖아요. 음양의 성질이 조화를 이루는 거기 때문에 좋은 결과를 만들어낼 수 있다는 뜻입니다. 일반인들이 궁합을 보는 이유는 큰 의미가 있습니다. 첫째는 둘이 성격 조화를 잘 이룰 수 있는지, 또 장차 둘이 행복하게 끝까지 해로할 수 있는지, 또 가정하고 가정이 만나는 거기 때문에 그 가정의 조화를 잘 이룰 수 있는지, 이 큰 틀을 서로 조화를 잘 이루어서 잘 살 수 있는지 그걸 보고 싶어서 궁합을 보는 것입니다.
According to Korean tradition, the man's family must first propose marriage to the woman's family. If the latter party accepts, the man's family writes down their son's birth date and sends it over along with other documents. The woman picks a good day for the wedding and notifies the man's family of the arrangements. The man lets the woman's family know his clothing size so the traditional wedding garments can be prepared. Then, the man's family sends over a wedding chest. All this happens before the wedding. Besides the tradition of checking fortunes and saju preceding a wedding, there is also the tradition of delivering the wedding chest to the bride's family by the groom's friends. The person who carries the wedding chest will shout out the words, "Buy the wedding chest," while wearing a dried cuttlefish fashioned into a face mask instead of smearing charcoal on his face. But this tradition is slowly vanishing from society. After going through the pre-wedding traditions, families begin the wedding rites. When the groom arrives at the bride's home, he presents his future mother-in-law with a carved wooden goose. This gift represents loyalty because geese are known to mate for life. Then the main part of the wedding ceremony begins. The clothes worn by the bride and groom feature bright colors and beautiful patterns. The bride's dress is called a hwalot. Originally, this design was reserved for royalty and commoners were not allowed to wear it. But an exception was made for weddings. The peony, lotus flower, butterfly, phoenix, stork, cloud, and stone patterns woven on the wedding clothes symbolize wealth, innocence, a new life, longevity, and many children. Makeup, called Yongdanji is applied to the bride's cheeks in a unique wedding custom. The red color of the Yongji Gongji is supposed to ward off evil spirits and keep the wedding sacred. During the wedding, the couple faces each other with the groom to the east and the bride to the west. They bow and exchange vows.
모든 것에는 짝이 있지요. 사람도 남녀가 있고 짐승도 자웅이 있고 그리고 자연의 동서남북이 있고 그래서 남자의 경우는 양이라고 하고 여자의 경우는 음이라고 하지요. 그러다 보면은 우리가 어떤 그 의식을 행할 때 특히 결혼 혼례식을 행할 때 그 결혼 초례청에서 보면은 남자는 동쪽에 여자는 서쪽에 그리고 절하는 데에도 남자의 경우는 홀수 여자의 경우는 짝수 그래서 남자가 한 번 여자가 두 번 이럴 때 이제 재배 이러면은 남자는 두 번 여자는 네 번 이러한 내용을 우리 인간은 잘 알고 자연의 섭리와 함께 동서남북 남녀 의식 이런 거를 생각하고 살아야 될 것입니다.
After the bride and groom exchange vows before many people, they pour wine into a hollowed-out gourd called pyeojubak and offer it to one another. This is the final rite of the wedding ceremony. The day after the wedding, the bride goes to her in-laws' home. She is carried in a palanquin to meet her parents-in-law for the first time. The newlyweds arrive at the groom's home. The groom's parents are presented with payback food. Payback is the custom in which the bride is formally accepted by and designated an official member of the groom's family. After the payback is set on a table, the bride bows to the groom's parents and pours a cup of wine for each of them. The groom's parents accept the wine and give a short speech, wishing the couple well. Then the bride's new in-laws toss chestnuts and jujubes at their new daughter while she tries to catch them in her dress. This custom symbolizes the groom's parents' wish for many grandchildren.
느낌은 상당히 좋은 것 같습니다. 일단은 비록 절차상으로 보면은 조금 까다로운 부분이 있지만은 그 절차 속에 다 뜻이 있었던 것 같고 또 다른 하객들도 이 기회에 와가지고 시청과 교육 같은 그런 교육적인 이미지도 있어서 참 좋았던 것 같습니다.
Many young couples today prefer to have traditional Korean weddings. At the Korean folk village and Korea House, where traditional Korean weddings are held, you can see many young couples exchanging vows the old-fashioned way. Married or not, and whether you're a local or a foreigner, anyone can witness a traditional wedding in modern-day Korea.
I thought it was very fascinating. It was really, really interesting. And
traditionally, they have never seen each other before, so really nice and interesting look into Korean lifestyle.
생각보다 되게 재밌고 특이하고 저도 이런 식으로 결혼을 했으면 좋겠다는 생각이 들었습니다.
너무 예쁘고요. 다시 한번 한다면 저도 이렇게 전통 혼례를 꼭 한번 해보고 싶어요. 네.
Newlyweds of past generations typically lived with their parents as part of an extended family. According to tradition, it is the eldest son's duty to take care of his parents and to continue the family line. This is why newly married couples often lived with the parents of the groom, and why it was common to see 3 generations living under the same roof. This was another tradition based on filial piety. Hwangab is a ritual celebrating a person's 60th birthday, one signaling that a person has successfully reached a ripe age. A special banquet is held on this day, and this also serves as an act of filial piety on the part of the offspring. Acts of filial piety continue even after the death of one's parents. But why exactly? Koreans see them as a chance to make up for things that were not done while the parents were alive. Traditionally, when an elderly person reached the last few hours of his or her life, the person's children gathered around the deathbed until he or she passed away. Once the person died, a family member was supposed to take a piece of the person's clothing onto the roof and call out the deceased's name 3 times, asking his or her soul to return. If the deceased showed no signs of life, a ritual table was prepared for the messenger of death.
자, 이놈들아, 먹고 잡냐? 그 밥은 이 집 할머니
Family
저승길
members changed into mourning clothes and held a ritual called Jeong for the dead person. These clothes were white, as colorful clothes were considered disrespectful. White also symbolized the light that would help the deceased find his or her way to the underworld. A funeral bier was prepared before a coffin was carried to the gravesite. A funeral bier ceremony, or nori, also took place one day prior to the funeral. The nori was a traditional Korean funeral ritual during which pallbearers sang and danced while carrying the empty bier and told funny stories to cheer up the family of the deceased. The ceremony was meant to bring laughter to the family and ease the pain of losing a loved one. It was also a final celebration for the deceased heading into the underworld. One form of nori was the Baegil village Hosang nori, which involved dancing among married couples. This nori was held to honor people who died rich and of natural causes after a long life. It is performed to this day and is considered an intangible cultural asset. In the Jeolla region, a flowered funeral bier leads a procession of mourners. The flowers added a celebratory, decorative flair for the person who had passed away, while deepening the sense of sorrow felt by the mourners. "I can't give up traditional methods and not use my hands," said Ham Chang-ki, a craftsman who makes flowered funeral biers. Using machines would make his work easier, but he adheres to age-old methods. He dyes paper by hand and carefully creates each paper flower. It takes him 3 days to complete one flowered funeral bier. The main feature of a flowered funeral bier is the colorful paper flowers, which have to look nothing short of magnificent. They are to make the departure of the deceased as splendid as possible. The nori was also part of the ceremony. Death and the sadness of parting with loved ones are part of the human life cycle. The nori expressed through music the grief of the mourners and celebrated the accomplishments of the deceased. The song also conveyed the wish that the deceased find a comfortable place to dwell in the afterlife. In another special custom, a coffin was set on a special spot prepared with rocks and wood. Grass was then placed over the coffin. After all the flesh had rotted away, which usually took 3 to 5 years, the bones would be taken out and arranged in the proper order, appropriate for a chobun funeral. Many commoners who could not afford elaborate funeral rites would choose this kind of funeral for their deceased. People eventually came to consider the chobun funeral more important than a person's first funeral. In South Jeolla province, a Sikkim-gut is held after a person dies. It's a shamanistic ceremony performed to prepare the soul for passage to the underworld. During this ceremony, a shaman uses a broom to sweep a model of a body wearing a traditional Korean hat in a ceremony that symbolizes cleansing. When 3 years have passed since the death of a family member, an ancestral spirit tablet made of wood was created and enshrined in a small sacred area inside the house. The household shrine was therefore considered a type of grave built within a home, and a place where Jesa was carried out in honor of the dead. Some families still practice this tradition. 4 generations of ancestors were typically enshrined in a shrine. Those honored included one's parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and great-great-grandparents. In the case that a new ancestral tablet is added to the shrine, those that were already there are moved up one spot to the left to make room for the new tablet. However, if a person was designated to receive a bulchonwi jesa, that meant he would be commemorated forever, and his shrine tablet would be kept in a specific sacred area. The more bulchonwi jesa a family held, the more honor they received.
합시정저 초분청문
한국의 제사의 종류는 크게 3가지가 있다고 하겠습니다. 첫 번째는 사당에 모신 4대까지 조상의 돌아가신 날에 지내는 기제사가 있습니다. 이 기제사 속에는 4대가 지내도 제사를 폐하지 않고 영원히 지내는 불천이 제사도 포함된다고 하겠습니다. 그리고 설과 추석 명절에 지내는 차례가 있습니다. 이때는 4대의 신주를 모두 모시고 지내는 제사입니다. 세 번째는 조상이 묻혀 있는 산소, 즉 묘에서 지내는 묘사가 있습니다. 이렇게 해서 한국에서 조상의 제사를 지내는 기간은 4대 봉사를 합하면 약 한 100년이 되고요. 불천이 제사를 이야기하면 10,000대가 지나도록 제사를 지내게 되는 것입니다.
Jesa were a means of demonstrating filial piety towards parents and ancestors. But during times of clan rule, the rituals were also carried out to ward off evil spirits and bad luck, and invite good fortune for the next generation. The most common type of Jesa is the Jesa for the house god, who brings wealth and tranquility. In keeping with tradition, commoners put rice from their first harvest into a jar in autumn. The jar was then placed in the middle of a house, which was thought to be the most sacred spot. During important holidays, this jar would be set on a table even before the other offerings were placed in front of the ancestral tablets. Traditional jeonanrye, or rituals for the dead, have gradually disappeared in modern times, but there are a few families keeping the tradition alive. They are the head families in each clan, a group including all of those from a certain region who share the same family name. At the home of the Andong-Hawe Yu clan's head family, the dates of each jeonanrye are inscribed on the wall to help the family keep track of them. At the southernmost tip of the Korean peninsula, in South Jeolla province, is Haenam. This is where the head family of the Kosan Yun Sondo clan lives, in a home called Nogudang. This head family observes a very special kind of jeonanrye. As you approach the Nogudang, you can see a 15,000 square meter farm that grows green tea. A father and his 2 sons have tended these fields for decades. In the anche room of the Nogudang, the family relaxes as they enjoy their cups of tea. Drinking tea is a daily ritual. The head family enshrines the ancestral ritual tablets in 3 sacred places, holding 30 Gyobaerye a year. In present-day Korea, it's time-consuming even to hold 2 Gyobaerye a year, but distinguished head families show their devotion to the tradition by carrying out many more. The Haenam Yoon clan head family observes a unique tradition of offering tea during their Gyobaerye.
옛날 그때는 차를 올렸는지 어쩐지는 몰라요. 그러나 제 조부님이 직접 차를 그 선조님들 제사 때랄지 차례 모실 때는 꼭 올렸다는 거. 그것은 방금 말씀드리다시피 뭐인가 그 깨끗하고 그 몸에 좋다는 거. 또 옛날 선조님들도 그것이 좋았기 때문에 마셨고, 특히 고산 선조께서는 그 차를 굉장히 많이 자셨어요. 그래가지고 저 역시 계속 제 후손들까지도 그 차에 대해서 계속 마시고, 또한 차의 그 제례에도 꼭 올려야겠다는 그런 생각이 변함이 없습니다.
The largest and grandest Korean memorial service is called the Jeonanrye. It is an important national memorial service held by the royal palace. The Jeonanrye emphasizes the basic Oriental philosophy, filial piety, as a national duty that upheld the system and created a common bond among the people. During the Jeonanrye A, or Royal Ancestral Ritual Music, is played. Both the Jeonanrye and Jeonanrye A were registered as World Cultural Heritage Items on May 18, 2001 by UNESCO. Chuseok and Lunar New Year's Day are important holidays in Korea. On these days, there is a mass migration as people visit family in the countryside. Families still prepare traditional food and carry out many traditional rituals. But as the nuclear family has largely usurped the extended family's place in society, formalities such as memorial services have changed substantially in modern times. But on important holidays, people head back to their hometowns and back to their roots to pay their respects to their ancestors. As soon as people are born, they begin to adopt the customs of their countries and assimilate into society. Throughout their lives, Koreans need to follow many daily formalities. But it is important to remember that filial piety is the basis of these traditions. Though social structures and formalities evolve over time, old traditions that have been handed down through the generations continue to mold the Korean spirit and lead Korean society.